Oh.
Okay, but it has to be comfortable. That is my one requirement in clothing is it has to be comfortable. I don't care how cute it is. I'm wearing it if it's not comfortable. So, and if it's passable, then I'll wear it. As long as it's okay, so let's talk about Mary anointing Jesus. This is the story. 6 days before Passover, so just to give you some, context, again, this is the Passover when Jesus will die. Okay, so 6 days before the Friday of the start of Passover, or maybe it was Thursday. Thursday was the start of Passover. So 6 days before that. Jesus therefore came to Bethany where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at table. Now that's weird, and I don't think I'm going to mention this because none of us lie down at the dinner table, right? Or if you do, your parents say sit up. But that was the traditional way that they would eat. The tables were low. There'd be cushions all the way around, and you would, in my case, because I'm left-handed, I would lean on my right elbow and then eat with my left hand. But most people would do it the other way, and that was just the way that they ate. And all over the world, people generally eat with their fingers. When I go to Zambia, I try really hard to remember to use my right. And if you've ever gone to the Minnesota trip, you were eating. So, that's not unusual at all.
Don't they just understand if you will?
Like
just before you even start to say, y'all, I am left-handed.
It can be offensive to them because this is the dirty handedness.
Yeah, that's why you just
Get my trick.
I know, but that's why you just it's gonna be opposite for me.
Okay, let's move on. Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples, he who was about to betray Jesus, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you will always have with you, but you do not always have me." So we'll come back to it. So you read about those other synoptic gospel anointings of Jesus. Did any of you think any of them were the same story? Okay, what did you think was the same story?
I thought Matthew and Mark were the most the most plausible to be the same story, but Luke had the most the way that Jesus was anointed.
Okay, so was more similar? Luke was more similar?
No, it's just the only thing that was similar was the way.
Okay.
That he was anointed.
Yes.
I think at least 3 of the stories were the same story, and one of them might have been, but probably was not.
Well, there are only 3 in total.
Because you've got John, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right?
Okay, but we're just looking at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and which are the same as John.
Oh, Matthew and Mark.
Yeah, you're right. Matthew and Mark are the same story. Luke is not. It's a sinful woman that is, and that was, very outrageous. So what are we to make then of the differences between the Matthew and Mark and then John? So all of them are compatible. There is nothing that would make it incompatible, those stories incompatible to John. And by the way, the Gospel of Mark was a source. It was the earliest written gospel, and it was a source for Matthew and Luke. But John obviously was an eyewitness, and he just told his own story. So it says that it's at the home of Simon the leper. But John doesn't say where it is. He just says that Martha served. That's all he says. That's not something that's incompatible. That's not something that is different in a sense. He doesn't say that it was at the home of some other guy. So here's how it's possible. These are possible kind of things of putting those two things together. So John only says that Martha served, and Simon may have been their father or her husband, Martha's husband, or a widower. And if he was a widower, he would have needed a woman to take care of that for him. And he may also have been someone who Jesus healed of leprosy, right? Yes.
Now, I'm gonna say, if he wasn't healed, if he like legitimately just had leprosy, doesn't they have rules where like the leper had to be like outside the city?
Yeah, they call him the leper because he had leprosy, and John may have called him that to remind people. Remember that guy that Jesus.
Follow up. Without miraculous healing, can you get better from leprosy, like just on your own?
I don't think. I think it's. I think there's treatments. Yes.
So is it possible that he was just like a friend of Lazarus or something?
Yeah, that's possible too, and that's the next thing I was going to say. We have no way of knowing if any of this is true, but John is completely compatible with the Mark and Luke, the other accounts, and it's quite possible, Jacob, that Martha was in charge of the kitchen or in charge of the food at Simon's house. It was at Simon's house, and he isn't related to them, but maybe if he was a widower, then or his wife wasn't able to, then Martha stepped in. I have a friend, and her name is, my children call her Miss Tony, and I usually refer to her as Miss Tony as well. Known her forever and ever. She loves to cook. She's always cooking for someone. She lives alone, but she's always making, and the first thing she'll say is, I'm coming over, and she'll come over, and she always brings food. Like, she's never shown up at my house without food. And she put it, she says, I just like to chop and dice. That's what I like to do. She does a lot of parties, a lot of catering for people, kind of ad hoc catering, because she knows that could be Mary, right? I had to make 2 huge casseroles, and she said, "Okay, I'm coming over," and she brought food for us to eat. And she chopped and diced with me and helped me out. And that might have been Mary, or Martha, excuse me. Martha might have been known for that kind of thing. But we just don't know. So let's talk about the anointing and the compatibility there. So Matthew and Mark mention that that the woman anointed Jesus' head. And John says the woman anointed Jesus' feet. It's about this much perfume. You ever seen a perfume bottle this big? No, that's a lot of perfume, right? And so there was so much perfume, but there was plenty of perfume to anoint all of Jesus' body, right? And he mentions this was made. This is done to prepare my body for my burial. So it's entirely possible that his whole body was anointed by Mary. I get like, I don't know if you ever opened up one of those magazines that has a perfume thing on the center. Yeah, I get a headache with that. I don't know. I don't think I could survive that much perfume. Um, the amount indicates that Mary anointed more than just his head or his feet. And as I told you, Jesus speaks of his body being prepared for burial. So why the difference? why do Matthew and Mark say he was anointed on just what on his head, and John his feet? Matthew and Mark were concerned. We talked about this early in the year about what their focus was. So for each of the Gospels, so Matthew and Mark were concerned with depicting Jesus as a king. And what did they do with kings when they became kings? When they were anointed, or not anointed, when they were crowned as king? Yeah. They would anoint their head, and David talks about that. They anoint my head with oil. That's what a king would do. It was symbolic of David. So, in other words, that's the part of those. That's the part of the the anointers, or the Mary's act, or excuse me, theme. That suited their theme best. But John is emphasizing Mary's act of devotion. So, anointing his feet, and can you imagine in a dusty, hot place where people wear sandals, and letting down her hair, which was unheard of. I don't know if you've watched any Victorian movies, but the women only let down their hair. This is the ancient times when they were at home alone. They didn't let down their hair with anyone except your family. So the letting down of her hair and the wiping of his feet are all extraordinary acts of humble devotion. And it also points to what Jesus will do in chapter 13 in washing his disciples. So in essence, John is holding Mary up as an example of what Jesus taught his disciples to do. This is the spikenard plant. We'll talk about that in a minute. But first we're going to just, well, we're good. We'll just. So Jesus arrived at Bethany just as Sabbath began on Friday. Sabbath began at sunset on Friday, and it lasted until nightfall on Saturday. Nightfall was defined as when 3 stars were visible. And this meal took place at the close of Sabbath on Saturday night. And they reclined at the table, as I told you, that was the custom with Lazarus and others. We aren't told all the others. And the perfume was pure nard. Pure nard comes from the spikenard plant, and that's what it looks like. And it has these reddish and purple flowers, and the perfume actually was kind of reddish and purple as well. And it smelled something like gladiolas, and it was really, really good perfume, and there was a lot of it, as I told you. So it tells us that it perfumed the entire house. It didn't just perfume Jesus. It perfumed the entire house. My mother's perfume of choice is Tiffany perfume, and I miss that smell so much. Whenever I would come back from, like, she'd be babysitting my children or whatever, or somebody else's babies, I don't know, like one of my other sister babies, I'd pick them up and I'd go, oh, Gunga was holding you, wasn't she? Because they would smell like Tiffany perfume from being near my mother. And this is what it's saying, that it didn't just perfume Jesus, it perfumed everything, the entire house. So this is either a wealthy family because this was also very expensive perfume. So, and there are other indications of that. Um, or perhaps it was a family heirloom. But any way you slice it, it is an extraordinary act of devotion that pleased Jesus. So it's an extraordinary act of devotion. The amount of the nard, the expense, the intimacy of letting down her hair, which was unheard of, all of it points to an extraordinary act of devotion to Jesus. This is what Gary Burge says. Mary is acting with abandon, extravagant abandon, hoping that the close circle of friends will understand. Here's the thing. In most places, she would have been shunned for it. She would have been vilified for what she did. Letting a man is on her husband, anointing him. I think it's hard for us to understand how shocking that is. And then D.A. Carson says this. This act signifies the utmost in self-humbling devotion in love, regardless of cost, the expense of the nard, or what others might think, letting down her hair to right Jesus. Now, Jesus defends Mary when Judas blurts out. And probably not just Judas. Others were probably thinking the same thing, although Judas for evil reasons. So Jesus is not. So Jesus's answer is that when Judas says, "Why wasn't this money given to the poor?" Jesus says, "Well, you always have the poor," which makes it sound a little insensitive to the poor, doesn't it? But Jesus isn't blind or insensitive to the needs of the poor. However, this is a unique time in history. The Son of God is in their midst, and he will not be there much longer. Less than a week. Think about that. No sacrifice is too much. No gift is too extravagant. There will be a time to sell such things to care for those in need. But now is the time to draw near to Jesus in humble devotion. I think it's perfectly legitimate for churches today to consider whether it is God honoring to spend extravagant sums of money on organs or sanctuaries or anything else. But this night, at Simon's house in Bethany, was not the time for that debate. It was a time to worship at the feet of Jesus and to prepare him for his burial. That was the purpose of that night. Now let's talk about this was intended to prepare me for my burial. It's difficult to translate what Jesus says there, but the gist is easy enough. The time for his burial is near, and it was intended that she save this perfume for the very time, for that very time, and for that very purpose of preparing his body. And in fact, 6 days later, the smell was so strong and pure that it likely did linger on his body. Now, let's apply. I want to talk about how we show devotion to Jesus. What does that look like? Think about that. This is such a beautiful picture of devotion. Mary just wants to be near Jesus. So how do we stay near to Jesus? The same way, and this is nothing new, right? The same way we stay near to anyone, by spending time with them. Talking to Jesus in prayer, that's obvious, right? Listening to him through his word, that's obvious. But what's less obvious is this. Going to places Jesus would. This is what it says in John 12:26. What Jesus says. If anyone serves me, he must follow me, and where I am, there will my servant be also. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him. I think that verse implies that we be doing the things that he would do. Yes. Yes. And if we are followers of Christ, his purpose will be our purpose. We will want to do the work he has called us to do. We will want to, in Jesus' words when he was younger, we will want to be about our Father's business. He told his parents that. Didn't you know? I have to be about my Father's business. Jesus didn't have any agenda for himself. His agenda was God's agenda. That's what we're supposed to do. So, where would Jesus go? Everyone has a different calling in life, but there are some things to which we are all called to make disciples. We're all called to make disciples. We're all called to use the gifts that God has given us. And if you don't know what your gift is, if you are a follower of Christ, you have at least one. And if you don't know what it is, talk to someone who knows you. They can help you figure that out. And then thirdly, we are all called to care for those people, particularly the most vulnerable among us. Over and over in the Old Testament, and I know I've told you this before, and I will keep telling you this, over and over in the Old Testament, God says, take care of the widow, the alien, and the orphan. Take care of the widow, the alien, and the orphan. And this is what each of those have in mind. They cannot take care of themselves. A widow needed a husband or a son to take care of her. And those widows, Paul calls them widows who are truly widows and who have no one to take. Not Paul, Peter calls widows who are really widows. I don't know, it's one of them. Take care of them, right? They can't take care of themselves. Aliens isn't from outer space. Aliens are people from a different country. So take care of those who are in a strange land and don't know how to navigate and don't know even how to communicate. Take care of those people. And then the orphan has no parents and needs someone to take care. It's why I go to camp every year. A lot of these children have been orphaned and foster care system by what was perpetrated on them. It's why I've been designed to help care for orphans. And it's why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. This is where Jesus, and it's where Jesus is. And when we are where Jesus is, not only will he lead us in that work, but that is when our lives will be most content, most fulfilling, and most joyful. I get asked fairly frequently if I still love my job. And I say the same thing every day. I have the greatest job in the world. I get to talk to teenagers about Jesus. What could be better than that? And I really feel like it. You need to find that thing that God has uniquely gifted you to do, and then do it in Jesus' name. For Jesus. So I pray that all of us would spend some time asking, where would Jesus go? Okay, that is, that lecture. And you can, chat. If any of you were absent yesterday and need to get the stuff, from yesterday, you can get that from me.
Those
It was